Before I start the presentation, let me sort of give you a background that would take us or lead us to where we are now in Egypt. And this background, I will start from the days of the ancient Egyptians, the people of the Nile. We grew up around the Nile, we had our civilization. The Egyptians were conquered throughout their history. And today, 2019, if some of you went to Egypt, you still see the true Egyptian identity. We have always been able to preserve our identity throughout our history for thousands of years. And this was clearly portrayed in the 2011 revolution, which has shocked our economy, and now we're recovering. And this is what I'm gonna talk about in the second part of my presentation today, which is the slideshow. So in the 2011 revolution, when the Egyptian people had concerns towards the regime and the government, and they revolted, they were able to preserve their country and their identity, and the military was playing the role of protecting the will of the Egyptian people when they revolted against the Mubarak regime. Then we went into a transition period by which another election was held, and the president who was elected was from the Muslim Brotherhood. The Egyptian people, after 1 year of Muslim Brotherhood rule, rejected this rule and rejected political Islam. And they revolted against political Islam. And they paralyzed the country and demanded their departure, which effectively happened. And the military played the role once again after 3 years in protecting the will of the Egyptian people and implementing their will by having the Muslim Brotherhood rule depart from power. It was not a military coup, as some people may portray or may understand. It was all led by the Egyptian people, who had their identity for thousands of years and who enforced their will with the support of the military. After the two revolutions, obviously, after the departure of the Muslim Brotherhood rule, we have witnessed terrorist attacks from extremists. And ironically enough, they were in Cairo. I was in Cairo at that time. So the Egyptian people felt more bitterness towards the political Islam rule and towards the Muslim Brotherhood rule, and simply they had more rejection. So after that, they directed their attacks towards the military and the police force until today. Now, sometimes we see some attacks against against some tourists. They just want to hurt the country. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of the Egyptian people, they know what they want for the country. They know the direction that they want for the country. And they are able to enforce their will and enforce their identity, which is not coinciding with the identity of political Islam. It was very, very obvious in the 2013 revolution. Moving on from this, it will show you how, when the elections were held by which President El-Sisi was elected, the amount of support that he is still getting until now, and one of them is through the harsh economic reform program that Egypt is undertaking now, testifies that the Egyptian people are still united behind their identity, are still preserving their country and are still pushing for their country to go in the direction that they want, far away from any political Islam. The first stop can be when President el-Sisi decided to go ahead with digging a parallel street in the Suez Canal for 37 kilometers. Actually, this was a project that we had the feasibility studies for some time. And he requested the participation of the Egyptian people. He was able to gather, through bonds, 46 billion Egyptian pounds in 6 days. That was a ballot box, simply. Support for something which is patriotic, which will obviously bring us money later down the road, and it did start to bring us more money, which would participate in international trade. Another stop would be in 2016, for example. Specifically in November 2016, the 4th of November 2016, the Egyptian government floated the Egyptian currency, and by which the prices were doubled overnight, because the $1 was equivalent to around 8 Egyptian pounds, and overnight it became like 16 or 17 Egyptian pounds. Now it's 17.6. And the prices doubled. And here let me factor in something very interesting. Since August 2016, the Muslim Brotherhood had a massive campaign via social media and what have you to sort of go out and revolt against the regime and the government on the 11th of November. Why did they choose the 11th of November? Because they had a symbol during the revolution, which is Rab'a. This was their symbol. So they chose 1111. And it was a massive campaign. And then we were all surprised with the decision to float the Egyptian currency, by which, of course, a lot of people would be affected, and by which a lot of people may be encouraged to go and express their dissatisfaction. But nothing happened on the 11th of November. And this was another testimony by the vast majority of the Egyptian people that they are willing to tighten the belt in return for having their country, their security, and their economic prosperity. Furthermore, going down the road, the economic reform program that we are implementing with the IMF and the harsh economic conditions that now the middle and the lower middle class of the Egyptian people are undertaking is also a testimony that they do have unequivocal political support to the current regime and to the government and to the direction of the country. And here, well, obviously you may say, oh, he's the Egyptian ambassador, he has to defend his country and his regime or whatever. But I have figures on the ground and reality, and the figures that I'm going to talk about here, I didn't take them from the Egyptian government. I took reports from the IMF and World Bank. So now I'll move on to the presentation. And this background was basically to give you an idea of where we are now and how those figures here would reflect the political direction of the country and would reflect the support that this direction has from the vast majority of the Egyptian people until today. And this is something very important because this provides the unity behind our identity, which we felt somehow it was being stolen from us during the 1 year of the Muslim Brotherhood rule. So now moving on to the economic part of my presentation. So why Egypt? Obviously because I'm Egyptian and I'm the Egyptian ambassador, but it's not only that, but it's also because the central location of Egypt. If you look at Egypt, it's in the center of the world. So it's in the passage between Asia, North Africa, Europe. Why Egypt? Because also when you invest in Egypt, you have consumers who are almost 100 million now. And believe me, the Egyptians, they like to consume. So when you come up with a good product, you're going to make a good amount of money. Beyond the Egyptian people, when you invest in Egypt, you will benefit from the free trade agreements that Egypt has. COMESA, for example, East African countries, the GAFTA, which is the General Arab Free Trade Agreement with all the Arab countries, the EU Association Agreement with Egypt, the QIZ zone, which is the Qualified Industrial Zone. It is a certain arrangement that we have with Israel and the United States, by which if a product, 40% of the product is manufactured in Egypt and Israel, you will have free access, duty-free access to US markets. The Agadir Agreement with Tunisia, Morocco, Jordan, the Mercosur with Latin American countries, and Egypt, Turkey FTA. So the investor will have duty-free market access benefiting from all these FTA agreements between Egypt and other countries. Also, you have skilled labor, over 29 million, and 60% of them are under the age of 30. And the labor is, we grew up in our public schools, we are always taught English. So they have a good background of English, and they are flexible to be trained, and their wages are competitive. Infrastructure. In the process of sort of picking up Egypt after two revolutions, the government now is sort of implementing a strategy of infrastructure, highways, airports, roads, train stations, more than what we already have now, from the ports, in order to create the necessary infrastructure to have more and more industrial production. Now we want to focus on production, not only tourism, not only the Suez Canal revenues, as we used to know. We want to focus on industrial production and agriculture production. So in order to do that, we need to have a revamped or a good infrastructure of roads and ports, etc. And this is what we are doing now. For example, here, we have completed the regional ring road. So if you see here Cairo, the ring road around Cairo is here, and we have here completed a regional ring road. And this regional ring road connects 7 governorates together, and it helps in increasing the movement of the merchandise. Like for example, in the 10th of Ramadan city, the PIL, which is a Singaporean prominent company, they have a logistics center there, by which they're going to expand it. So now they would have much easier access to go to the 6th of October city or go to Upper Egypt in the south using this new ring road. And also this would facilitate the products or the merchandise coming from Sinai region and East Port Said port, which is being built newly here, and I will get to that later on. So this new ring road facilitates the movement of the merchandise. And this was completed last year. Natural resources. We have the Golden Triangle, which is full of mineral. It's in Upper Egypt. And we have, of course, the Zohr field of natural gas, by which I think this year we are going to be a net exporter from this field. The tax rates are 22.5. It's a flat rate. And there is also the option of investing in the Suez Canal Economic Zone. See, the Suez Canal Economic Zone, it's a duty-free zone that the companies are exempted from taxes, from custom duties. You have the incentive of 100% ownership of the company and control of import-export activities. It's very easy to set up a company. It's like a one-stop shop. And if you would like to export to the Egyptian market, you would only have to pay the custom duty on the important components and not on the final product. And it's a huge area. I don't know if you can see it from here. It goes up to East Port Said, which is the new port being built, and which has an entrance from the new Suez Canal. Let me try to show you here. Oops. I changed the... Okay, over here, if you see this right lane going up, this is a new lane that was dug when we dug the two-way street here for the 37 kilometers that would go directly to East Port Said port. And the idea is to have East Port Said port as a transit port for container transits. For the big ships, when they come from Asia, they would transit the shipments over here, and the small ships would come here and take it to the Mediterranean. So this is a newly built port with a special entrance from the new Suez Canal zone. And this whole area is the economic zone of the Suez Canal until Port of As-Sokhna. Close to Port of As-Sokhna, the Chinese, they have an industrial park. And other investors are investing in this area. So in order to serve East Port Said, we are building tunnels to connect Sinai to the mainland of Egypt. And we have connected already the fiber optic cable for the internet and all the necessary infrastructure. And we have also sort of created zones of investments, like investment in the field of agriculture in the Suez Canal Economic Zone, of industries, car-feeding industries, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have recently reached an agreement with Russia for a huge investment in the Suez Canal Economic Zone. There is a German company that's going to build a huge pharmaceutical plant. And lately, we have reached an agreement with Mercedes-Benz to build a huge assembly factory that would assemble the 4x4s like the GLEs, who are only produced in the United States, and that would export from there to the region. So it's going to be a huge project, and this agreement was reached 2 weeks ago. So the incentives of the Suez Canal Economic Zone are also there. So basically, the producer can come, build a factory, export his products. He has 6 nearby ports, export his products, benefit from FTAs with COMESA countries, with other countries, or with Europe. Now, moving on to the growing economy. Those are the highlights of our economic growth. In fiscal year 2017 to 2018, we start our fiscal year on the 1st of July and it ends on the 30th of June. So Egypt was able to achieve a 5.3 GDP growth rate. Our population, as I said before, is around almost 100 million. Net FDI increased also from 2016 from 6.9 to 7.9, and we are still working on it. The international reserves thankfully increased to 44.5 billion US dollars. Unemployment rate, we were able to bring it down to 9.9. The headline inflation, if you can see here, 2016, 2017, it was 33%, and this was in the aftermath of floating the Egyptian currency. The prices went skyrocketing, that it was absolutely a bit too much, because I remember when I was in university in the mid-80s, we used to talk about floating the Egyptian currency, and we used to talk, I studied economics, and we used to talk about lifting subsidies. And at that time, the government and the Mubarak regime said no way, because he was very, very concerned about sort of unrest, and that it would be a bit too much of a burden on the Egyptian people. So, which is interesting that in 2016, and with Egypt coming out of 2 revolutions, and the economy is in a very challenging situation, the government decides to float the Egyptian currency and lift subsidies within the framework of the economic reform program. So, which is basically another testimony to how the Egyptian people are united to preserve the country and save their country and move forward with the economy and bear the burden. Here, I would like to refer to the World Bank's Economic Outlook, which was issued on the 3rd of October. And that's why I said earlier, I'm going to refer you to international reports and not Egyptian reports, in order to sort of reflect the reality on the ground and how things are. So basically, the World Bank in October confirmed a GDP growth of 5.3% compared to 4.2% in fiscal year 2016-2017. In its report, it mentioned that Egypt, the economic sectors that were fast growing were the natural gas, the telecom, constructions, in addition to the rebound of tourism. And it was very interesting that last year we had a lot of tourists, much more than the year before, tourists from Singapore going to Egypt. And we are still on the rising numbers. Hopefully this year will be the same. The report mentioned that it praised that the foreign reserves increased to 44.4 billion in August 2018. The current account deficit narrowed during the first 9 months of FY 2018 to 2% of the GDP, down from 5% the year before. It expected a growth in public investment with a recovery of private investment. The thing is now, the driving force of the economy is much more public investment than private investment. But we are laying the ground, whether through the infrastructure, whether through allocating industrial lands for industries. We are pushing, and of course our framework of laws and regulations, we have changed the laws and amended the laws in order to make it more investment friendly, to attract investors. So we are moving on many fronts in parallel to have the necessary political and economic environment for the private sector to be the driving force of the economy and increase the private, which started to happen in 2018, and we're expecting it to increase in 2019 and 2020. The World Bank report further goes on to mention that the expected increase in tax revenues and further cuts in energy subsidies will further help fiscal consolidation. Yes, we have amended our tax law by which taxes going to the government increased, and we have lifted subsidies on energy, whether it was fuel, electricity, and it did help the fiscal consolidation, and it did help the budget deficit to go down. And lastly, the report predicts a growth of 5.6 in FY 2019. Well, predictions are between 5.6 to 5.9, depending on the economic institution that has issued reports. But the World Bank report is talking about a growth of 5.6%. Here I also wanted to mention that the higher gas production, especially from the giant Zohr field, it is expected that by this year we would be a net exporter of natural gas from this field. Most recently, last week on the 25th of January, the managing director of the IMF issued a statement. It was on the occasion of the beginning of the review that is done before releasing a tranche of the $12 billion loan that Egypt signed the agreement with the IMF in November 2016. So basically, Christine Lagarde said, Egypt has made substantial progress as evident in the success achieved in macroeconomic stabilization. Its growth rate is now among the highest in the region. The budget deficit is on a declining track. Unemployment has declined to around 10%, which is the lowest since 2011, and social protection measures expanded. And this is a very important component in the homegrown economic reform program that Egypt is implementing with the assistance of the IMF. Because it's not only regulatory reforms and structural reforms, but also we injected in a very important component, which is to social safety net to protect the interest of the poor and decrease the negative effect of the economic reforms. The managing director further went to say that the board will meet in the coming weeks, which is in the coming weeks of February, to discuss the review, and I will recommend that the board approve the review. Basically, by this review, which is expected to be approved, Egypt would have, and the release of the $2 billion tranche, Egypt would have received $10 billion of the $12 billion loan. And this last statement is important politically because she said, I would like to take this opportunity to commend the patience and commitment of the Egyptian people. And this statement is relevant to the background I gave earlier because it shows that people and international economic institutions began to realize how the Egyptian people are motivated and committed to the progress of their economy and their country. She further said this will pave the way for a higher and more inclusive growth for the long term, and she reiterated that the fund stands ready to help achieve more prosperous future for Egypt. Actually, here I was going to add a slide on reports that Johan, for example, referred to about Egypt being Standard Chartered Bank report and another report, Harvard Center report. But I thought it was going to be like a too much or an overdose of praising Egypt, so I just deleted it last minute. But I had things there. But thank you, Johan, for referring to that. Here in this section, I'm going to move on to talk about the reforms, the legal and regulatory reforms that Egypt has undertaken within the economic reform program. Basically, we have a new investment law, debt restructuring law, sole partnership companies law, commercial registry law, commercial companies law, real estate registration law, and capital market law, bankruptcy law. So this was on the legal front. Egypt has taken many steps to sort of amend and update its laws to make it more investment friendly. And the new Supreme Council was established to design future investment policies and prioritize economic activities and sectors in the Egyptian investment market in accordance with the State's Development 2030 vision, which does coincide with implementing the SDGs. So this council would sort of harmonize all the policies related to investment and attracting investments. The new investment law, which came into effect in 2017, it would improve Egypt's investments environment and designed to ease the foreign direct investment attractiveness and developing the investment service center, allowing investors to approach a single body for approval. So it's like we have developed this one-stop shop also to invest in Egypt, not only in the Suez Canal economic zone. It would help adapting a stable, predictable legal framework for land allocation, dealing with insolvency issues, to have a clear and transparent exit market strategy and speed up processes in case of liquidation. Guarantees for investments in the law, protecting the project from nationalization, obviously, guardianship and seizure, free pricing of products, protection of the product from the arbitrary decisions. And here I would like to mention that a new body was established to look into commercial disputes that arise. So now the investor is not obliged to go to the Egyptian court system. He can go to this new body, which is represented from different entities, and have some sort of a decision on a commercial dispute. Also in the law, the right of money repatriation, of course, and this is a question that I have received many, many times. And I think that our Minister of Trade and Industry, when he was here at SBF last February, he did mention that there is now it's free to repatriate all the profits and the liquidation output, regulate the use of foreign employees, the right of obtaining data and information, respect and enforcement of contracts, rationalization and regulation of criminal liability for investment. Among the incentives of the new law, see the tax deduction from 30 to 50% of the investment cost over 7 years. And the 30 to 50%, it depends on the investment zone where the investor is investment, because there is a free zone, not like the Suez Canal. We have investment zones within Egyptian land. And it depends also on the field of investment. If it's IT, for example, or if it is to alleviate poverty, you will get more tax deductions than another investment. Sorry. Like here, investment in technological hubs is granted 50% tax deduction. This I wanted here to give an example. about the range of 30 to 50%. So it would depend on the zone you're investing in, and it would depend on the field of investment. The sales tax on the equipment and machines that you import for production is trimmed to 2%. And this is to encourage investors to come and build factories, because we have allocated a lot of lands for industries and factories. And actually there are many fields that you can invest in. Like for example, we assemble in Egypt refrigerators and washing machines. And we consume a lot, because obviously a lot of Egyptians, they grow up every year, they get married, and they need to buy a refrigerator. But we import most of the components, the vast majority of the components. So I had an investor once who told me, I mean, if I can produce the water pump of a washing machine, I would make a lot of money. And he's still studying this possibility, you know. So there are many fields. If you invest in something which is not very expensive, but you can make a lot of money out of it. It depends on which field and your analysis of the market. So here the corporate tax, the flat rate of 22.5, full customs exemptions, of course, for the free zones like the Suez Canal economic zones. Allow for foreigners, of course, to own 100% of the project and the land and real estate. Provide a quick and transparent mechanism for the disposal of land and real estate allocated for investment in various fields of investments like agriculture, industrial tourism services, etc. Access to state-owned land and property free of charge in designated areas. So those were the main incentives that I wanted to highlight about the new investment law. The Investment Service Center, it's like the one-stop shop. So it provides services related to establishing companies and their branches, approving the minutes of their board of directors, their general assemblies, issuing approval and permits, and allocating the necessary real estate for the establishment of projects. And it serves also as the liaison between the company or the project and the government entities. And it provides legal services and notary services for investors. So this is a new center that was established also to further facilitate for the investors in having their investment in Egypt. The regimes, as I said earlier, there are the free zones, there are the investment zones, and there are the technology zones. And each zone has a different sort of tax deduction rate. Free zones, like private free zones that are business clusters managed by GAFI. GAFI, which is the General Authority for Investment, and it is part of the Ministry of Investment. The rationale behind promoting the free zones is to encourage economic activities and increase exports by adopting a multi-sectorial development approach, focusing on linking lagging regions together with both domestic and foreign markets. Investment zones, on the other hand, are integrated clusters in the different fields and sectors, where the investors are granted legal rights to provide integrated services to serve the local market. So he gets a special incentive and he can serve the local market. It doesn't necessarily have to be a totally free zone like the Suez Canal economic zones. Technology zones are created for specialized activities in the fields of industry, logistics, information, and communication. Key sectors that the investment can be, of course, we have the agribusiness and engineering, electronics, healthcare, logistics, mining, ICT, pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals, retail, textile. And on the occasion of talking about textiles, there was a Sadat city that was built some time ago, I think in the ending years of former President Sadat. It is on the desert road between Cairo and Alexandria. The infrastructure is there, but it has been sort of neglected for many, many years. And now we are sort of preparing the city to be a main textile production city. And I understand that we are talking to China about moving some of their factories of textile over there, because now Egypt has become part of the One Belt, One Road, and not only a corridor using the Suez Canal. So we're gonna have Chinese investing in Egypt. So that city is being prepared to be a major city for producing textile, because the infrastructure is there, the housing is there, the electricity, the water, the everything, but it has been sort of neglected over the last 20, 30 years. Tourism, of course, renewable energy, we're moving forcefully in that field, especially social energy, and automotive industry. Mega projects I would like to refer to, of course, the new administrative capital that I'm sure that everyone has heard of. And I believe that some days ago, there was an article published in The Economist that was sort of criticizing the new administrative capital, claiming it has no name and it has no people, etc., etc. I mean, it would be very easy to sort of explain that the new administrative capital does have a name, which is the new administrative capital, basically. And the second thing, so I mean, I was like sort of, you know, well, no comment about the headline or of the article. And the other thing is that before you know it, this capital is going to be full of Egyptians. I mean, and here I'm not going to like sort of try to promote my country, but I'm going to talk about facts and reality on the ground. I mean, when we have expanded Cairo and built 6th of October City and New Cairo, what we call New Cairo now, which is the fifth settlement, which is all the whole area after or surrounding Cairo, people moved out and people spread out a lot. And people now are getting ready to move to the new administrative capital. We, the foreign ministry, by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, we're going to be working from the new administrative capital. So, but in any case, I mean, there are articles and everyone has the right to sort of express his opinion, but the new administrative capital is a huge project and is advancing faster than people have expected. And now the roads linking Cairo and its outskirts to the new administrative capitals are being built. Within, I would say, 3 to 4 years, you're going to see probably some traffic jams over there. And we have the 1.5 million acres. And this was also a project, a mega project that was launched by President Sisi to reclaim 1.5 million acres of desert land. And I personally went and visited the company established because actually the person who runs the company happened to be a friend of mine. So I went to visit him and I saw firsthand information about this project, which is going very well. And more Egyptians now are going to buy pieces of land and they provide the underground water, but with a limit. And they have regulations on the type of product that you will cultivate, because they cannot, for example, agree to a product that would consume a lot of water, because they have limited water and they give every acre a certain amount of water. So, well, you said I have 45 minutes. Am I done? Oh, okay. And the Golden Triangle, as I talked about earlier, it's an economic zone located in the south of Egypt, near Kana, Safaga, and El Qusair, and it's considered one of the richest areas in mining sources, accounting for 75% of Egypt's minerals. Al Alamein city is up. It's sort of going to be a new Alexandria. I'm sure some of you have heard of Al Alamein, World War II, but it's being developed in a very fast pace now, especially in the field of tourism. And Damyata Furniture City, Damyata has always been advanced in the field of furniture, and now we are further developing Damyata to be like the center for producing furniture. And here, of course, if you have any questions, you can just talk to Gafi right away, which is the General Authority for Investment, with the contact details here. Let me take you back sort of fast here. Yes, you can see Damyata port up there. Damyata port is up there, close to Port Said. So this is going to be like a center or a hub for producing furniture and exporting. And I would be more than happy to answer your questions, if any. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, any questions?
Hi, I'm Rolanda Michelanda from Standard Chartered. I'm here in my individual capacity. So my question for you, I'm originally from Zambia, and one of my fascinations with Egypt is its uniqueness in that it's an Arab state that's also proudly African and courts companies from Russia, US, China with ease. What I'm struggling with, and I'm glad you mentioned that you're an economist, is when you think back to Ricardo's to your comparative advantage, right? You mentioned a lot of things that are happening in Egypt and a lot of incentives. But what I'd really like to know is what will Egypt's economic growth be anchored to? So when you think about Dubai, their strategy was we will be the financial center of the Middle East and we will connect the rest of the world through Emirates. But what is it about Egypt that going forward will be the anchor? Will it be the Suez Canal? And just trying to figure out what to pinpoint the economic growth on. Thank you.
Well, basically, when I was studying economics, we had four main anchors for our economy. It was tourism, Suez Canal, remittances, and oil. And now we have a completely new vision because obviously tourism is very much affected by one gunshot, even if it was in the air. So we have decided we're not going to rely on tourism. Suez Canal, yes, Suez Canal, and it is part of the whole bigger picture of developing Egypt economically, having the Suez Canal economic zone, digging the two-lane street in the Suez Canal. So it is going to be one of our anchors, but the main anchor would be production. Production, because this is the thing that lasts, agriculture and industries. And this is what we're working on very hard. We have laid the ground, infrastructure, roads, communication centers, etc. And this is what we're focusing on. Financial center, I think that we have to sort of achieve what we're doing right now and maybe move forward to having some sort of like a financial free zone or whatever. But in order to reach there, I think now we are in a critical position, you know. I mean, all these economic reforms were not easily done. And I want to be very clear on that. Were not easily done. And all the sectors of the Egyptian society did bear the consequences, but they are willing to bear the consequences. So we just have to take it step by step, and we have to lay the ground for real growth based on production. You're an economist probably, and you know it's production more than anything else. So yeah, thank you.
So my name is Mahesh. I work with Philips Lighting, now known as Signify. So Egypt is an important market for us because our Africa headquarters is also based there. So we believe in Egypt. But we have a couple of concerns on Egypt. Is You talked a lot about investment, and I believe it's a strong future. But we have a lot of flip-flops on policy. So one day there is import duty of 60% on some of our products. We all prepare for it. Next after 2 months, it suddenly disappears. So that's one concern I have as to how can we work through you to understand what is really the policy for Egypt on production, because duties becomes a critical deal. If you have duties and then you lift them, it's a problem. Second concern I have is on grid. When you talked a lot about helping in terms of payments and so on and so forth. But sometimes some of our clients, and that can be the Ministry of Health or even the Army, it takes a long time for us to get some of our money back. I mean, we don't have a doubt it will come back, but it does take time. So these are my two questions. How can you help address those?
Well, that's very easy. I'll just talk to them. No, about the taxes and the customs, etc., etc. I don't know when was the last time or how frequent does this happen, or has it happened recently, or was it done in light of, within the framework of the regulatory reforms, etc., etc., etc. But I do know for a fact that Philips Lighting is doing very, very well in Egypt, and that all the people I know, they buy Philips, and we always go focused on buying Philips lamps. But as I said, regarding this customs duty thing, we are in a stage where the chips sort of are falling into place, or we are trying to have the chips to fall into the right place. And this is a period where you can see some change in policies, etc., that would settle down the road for sure after the full implementation of the reform program.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Sure.
Can I ask, is the special economic zone, special economic zone at Port Said all stretched all the way down into the Suez and into...
Yeah, to Sokhna, all the way down to Sokhna. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your Excellency, I am from Philips Lighting as well. So to add to my colleague's questions, maybe when you talk to the concerned officials in the government, a request to you would be to emphasize on the need for ease of doing business, especially for multinationals like us. So we are confronted with situations where policy announcements happen with immediate effect. So today an announcement comes, from tomorrow the duty goes up to 60%. So we are stuck with all our incoming shipments here. We can't do anything about it. Then another policy decision comes, from tomorrow you will not be allowed to import beyond this value. So then we have to go and meet the governor of the Reserve Bank and plead that we are actually contributing towards energy savings of Egypt to our energy saving solution. And then we see intervention from the governor and the government, and things then change. So every time it's a case where something happens, we are stuck. We have to go and meet the government, make our representations, and then of course things happen. So one of the requests to you would be, how can you help in ease of doing business for multinationals like us?
Okay, again, I mean, this brings me back to what I mentioned earlier. I believe that what you're talking about is something very recent that happened, maybe within the past month or the past year. And here I am going to tell you, we are in the process of revisiting the whole tax system and the whole customs system, and how to have things done in a way that would benefit the government and benefit also the investors. And this is a period where you're going to have fluctuation in policies and customs duties and et cetera, until the things settle down and become sort of permanent. So unfortunately, you are now in this period where all of a sudden you wake up in the morning, you have the customs duty here, you cannot import more than this, et cetera, and then you make your argument to go. You can go to GAFI, you can go to Investment Service Center and talk to them. They are there to help. But you make a case, you say that you help, for example, participate in the efficiency of use of electricity in Egypt, etc., etc. They can revisit the issue. So we are in a period where we are revisiting our laws, our policies, etc. So this would affect definitely investors like Philips in Egypt. But I would be confident to say that it would not negatively affect Philips or investors in a way that would push them out of Egypt. On the contrary, we have now Tolaram that's going to Egypt, and they're going to build a factory to produce noodles. They have started producing Kellogg's noodles for the first time in the history of Kellogg's. It was produced in an Egyptian factory, in a production line. I'm sure you're aware of it. And now they are looking into buying an industrial land and having their own factory to produce noodles and all their products of spaghettis. So thank you for this question, because this is important to highlight that we are still in the period of, implementing those reforms, and definitely we're going to have hiccups, and definitely we're going to have to revisit some issues like the product of Philips, for example, saves energy, so maybe we should give it a special attention or a special incentive, etc. But I advise you to go to GAFI, the General Authority for Investment.
Thank you.
It is correct. Terrific mentors. Just a question, since you mentioned two revolutions, I wanted to ask you, what's your forecast or guess about what would trigger perhaps a third? What are the underlying conditions, if any?
Well, in my presentation today, I tried to sort of inject in many parts of it real factual proof on the direction and the will of the vast majority of the Egyptian people for the direction of the country that they are opting for, which is far away from political Islam. And here I want to say something which is obvious to everyone. The Egyptian people are religious by nature. They go to the prayers on Friday, they fast Ramadan. The vast majority of the Egyptian people are religious by nature. But the governing of the country, they have always separated, they like to always look at Islamic laws, Sharia laws. We have some of the Sharia laws in our laws, but for example, our civil laws, they are completely different. I mean, the woman has the right to go and ask for a divorce, and the court can give her a divorce. So there is always a differentiation between having or them wanting to inject Islam in politics or only Islam for themselves. And it has always been for themselves. And this is a very important issue. So I would say that from what I have seen, and not only me, and I have friends who voted for former President Morsi, who was a Muslim Brotherhood. I have friends of mine who are graduates of the American University in Cairo, who are very well educated, probably abroad. But the thing is, if you break down the votes, okay, Primo, he won by a 1.2 margin. This is the first thing. Secondly, if you break down the votes, you had a third of the vote, hardcore Muslim Brotherhood and supporters. The estimates are 4 to 4.5 million out of 100 million, by the way. And you had people who voted for former President Morsi who basically thought that why not give them a chance? And among them were friends of mine. Why not give them a chance? I mean, they have been underground for many, many years. Why don't we give political Islam a chance and see how they will govern and rule the country? And the third part thought that I would vote for the devil, but not his opponent, who was part of the former Mubarak regime. So it made no sense, people went to revolution, people got killed, and then we go to vote for someone who is part of the Mubarak regime? No, I would vote for the double. So basically, this is how he got the majority of the votes by a very, very small margin. So if you understand this breakdown, you would understand the dynamics and the real will of the vast majority of the Egyptian people. And obviously, after 1 year of rule, when we felt that our identity is being stolen, when we saw our taxi drivers standing 3 hours to pump gas because the Muslim Brotherhood used to give the gas to Hamas in Gaza in the name of brotherhood and unity and the Ummah and the Islamic Ummah, which is okay. I mean, we have always been Egyptian, we have always had our country and had our resources for us. But we standing in line for 3 hours to pump gas in our taxis, no. So it was a frustration on all the sects of the Egyptian society. And everyone went. In the 2013 revolution, you had women wearing, I don't know how many thousands of US dollar diamond rings walking next to the doorman. It was remarkable. And not only in Cairo, it was, I mean, go back to the footage, Google it. I'm not gonna, So the way I see it is now, from what I've seen the development since 2013, it's not gonna be economics, because now even the lower middle and lower class of the society, they are bearing the consequences of these economic reforms. Why? In return for security and stability and economic prosperity. So I don't foresee a revolt for economic conditions. I would see a more resentment towards political Islam if things start to rise one more time.
So it's Jason, I'm in private equity real estate. Like Johan, I'm South African. So our question revolves around real estate and property, land ownership. In South Africa, we have potential issues with the redistribution of land. And is there such issues or risks in Egypt with regards to redistribution of land? So part one of the question. And the second part, what are the stamp duties and taxes with ownership of land?
Redistribution in what sense? You're talking about industrial land or private, like housing, or all? Agricultural. I mean, we have, as I said, we have the 1.5 million acres to reclaim one desert land. And there is a master plan of industrial land within the regional road. Like if you move up beyond the administrative capital, if you're going towards Suez and going to Sokhna, there is an industrial cluster there for industrial land and also agricultural land. So there is a vision, a master plan for industrial land and agricultural land and housing, especially around the Cairo area. The second part, you're talking about taxes?
Stamp duties and taxes for a foreign buyer or even locals. Are there stamp duties when you buy property or land?
There is, but it's not very high. Okay. Yeah, there is, but it's not very high. Actually, the real estate market is very vibrant in Egypt, and people are, owning now houses and townhouses and gated compounds with gym and pool and all what have you. So it's really developing very fast, especially on the outskirts of Cairo and in the new cities like the 6th of October city and what we call New Cairo, Fifth Settlement, First Settlement, going towards Sokhna area.